will in fact not trade Russ. This despite the quarterback's frustration with the poor protection plan that Seattle has for him. Greg, are you buying that the Seahawks can make this work with Russell Wilson?
I am buying that the Seahawks can make this work because they have no other choice and no other option but to make it work. You don't have one of the best quarterbacks in all of football and not try your best and not give every effort to make it work. Now, does that mean they are going to win? No, it does not, because I truly believe that when you look at the way this team has been configured and when you look at from the coaching and what side of the ball Pete Carroll gives the most attention to, it's that defensive side of the ball. And then his style that he wants to play with offensively is more of a managing perspective. And so that's where Russell Wilson is really at odds. And when he talks about I need more protection, he wants to throw the ball. He wants to be in charge. He wants to be the catalyst that they ride when we look at their offense, not just running the ball. It doesn't mean that he doesn't want to turn around and have an effective running game. But when you have a player that is as elite as Russell Wilson, he is more than just a managing quarterback. And that's how he entered into the National Football League. But that is not who he is of date. He is a guy that can put the ball in the end zone that you can ride with, and then you put pieces around him to make him better and make the team ultimately better. LeVar, let me hear what you got.
Well, I'm buying it, but my take on this is really not about Russell Wilson being at odds with the Seattle Seahawks. This is about Russell Wilson asserting himself in conversations like what Aaron Rodgers was a part of a year ago. Remember, this is a man that has played at an elite level for all these years and yet doesn't sniff getting the MVP. He's got to start his campaign at some point in time. And if he had to use collateral damage with his offensive line and the offensive protection of what he had going on this season, that's what he's going to do. Nothing personal. It's just business. He's fighting for legacy. We heard legacy being mentioned when talking about Russell Wilson. So we could talk about creating a run game, figuring out what's going to go on defense. But this team did win the NFC West this year, by the way, y'all. So it's not like it's not working. They just have to do a little bit more up front. They know that. He didn't state anything that wasn't of the obvious. I think this is more so about getting the conversation on Russell Wilson for a bigger play at the table in terms of recognition of his talents.
Yeah, I agree. Look, Chris, they got no choice but to make this work. Yeah, so what you do is you make your future Hall of Fame quarterback happy. It's as simple as that. From what the reports are saying, he went to the Seahawks and tried to talk to them privately about getting him some better pass protection, about making the offense a little bit more innovative, and he didn't like the response that he got. So then he went public, and I think we need to get used to more football players going public with their gripes, because I think Russell Wilson is looking at an Aaron Rodgers and saying, you don't get much better than Aaron Rodgers, but he hasn't gotten close to a Super Bowl in the last decade. And that's because the team hasn't built around him. Then he looks at Tom Brady and all the guys he brought with him to Tampa and how the team accommodated him, and they win a Super Bowl. I think Russ kind of feels like the Seahawks might be content just being relevant. They got a Super Bowl. You know, that's a city where the fan base is rabid, and they're going to always be rabid as long as you're a relevant team getting to the playoffs. And Russ is saying, no, I am not going to be satisfied with that. He's looking at Pat Mahomes and the innovation that he has in his offense. He's looking at how Matt LaFleur helped rejuvenate Aaron Rodgers' career. And he's saying, we got to get a little bit more creative. DK Metcalf talked about it after the season. It was run with the play action, throw it deep, and teams figured them out. First 8 games of the season, the Seahawks had 30 points or more 7 times. The last 8 games of the season, they did it once. So those are the things Russ is talking about. Obviously, they got to shore up the offensive line. He told Colin Cowherd he wants to play 10 to 15 more years. Not with that offensive line. Have you seen Cam Newton? All right, if Russ keeps taking these types of hits, he knows that he's not going to be able to play another decade. So I think Seattle's got to do whatever it takes to make him happy. And I think ultimately that'll make the team better, Greg.
I hear you, and I agree to an extent. But the reason why I talk about, do they really want to win? It's not that, yes, LeVar, they won the NFC West. Yes, that's great. But as Chris mentioned, yeah, they're going to always be relevant. And that is good for a lot of players. But when you are one of the best in the business, that is not it. To your point, LeVar, about legacy, you have to start to stack those successes. And he has already won a Super Bowl early in his career, got to a second, and then has not sniffed anything else. You talked about Aaron Rodgers and what he's not been able to do. Russell, the league, not just from a players and coaches and schematic standpoint, is a copycat league, but even when it comes to players, they look and see what players have done, what they haven't done, what organizations have done around them, and they want those types of things done. Once you've established yourself in this league, you have to take these opportunities and seize them. LeVar, you know and I know, when you play in this league behind that mask, specifically at that quarterback position, if you don't speak up and say what you want, it will not happen.
Yeah, well, I think that's the constant evolution of technology and the ability to control your own narrative, right? I mean, that's what Russell Wilson is doing. That's what many of these players are doing these days. Tom Brady, you name it. Everybody is leveraging the platforms that are out there for them to be influencers. They can actually reach a larger audience than the team sometimes. So you got to believe that those are the things that are going to take place. But, you know, one thing that you said, Broussard, that I want to address that I think is pretty interesting is the idea of coming out and talking about that our offense was figured out. We were predictable. It's interesting because when you look at the best teams in the league, you look at Kansas City this year, they were predictable. I mean, if you looked at what they did, they ran jet sweeps. They moved you around. They did trickeration coming back to the center of the field. They liked crossing. They liked slanting. They liked sitting in the center of the field. And no one could figure it out, even though it's not a complex idea of how you run your offense. I think the conversation that has to ensue and take place for Russell Wilson, along with the rest of the core guys that are on that Seattle Seahawks team, is to look within. All of the greatest players I've been around, I don't have the opportunity to say or boast that I was in a Super Bowl, but I have played with plenty of Hall of Famers. And the one trait that I always saw when I was in the locker room with guys like Bruce Smith and Deion Sanders and Darryl Green and Champ Bailey, the preparation and the willingness to look at themselves and how that applies to what their performance is going to be and how that plays out for the performance of the team has to be the most important aspect of what it is that's taking place, especially as a leader. So I would urge and say, don't always be pointing the finger talking about it was the game plan. We were too predictable. Well, you know what? Randy Moss was predictable going downfield. You know what happened? Randy Moss still caught the ball. You know why? Because Randy Moss wanted that ball. So he took that ball. So if I'm DK Metcalf, get the ball. I don't care if they know the play. If I'm Russell Wilson, figure it out. Don't take the sacks. Some of those sacks are holding the ball sacks, right? So to me, I want to see Russell Wilson come to the table and make his team better. I get helping him, and I believe in that. Voice your opinion. You have the platforms. But Chris, when people know your plays, they know your plays. That's what you get paid to do as a defensive coordinator and as a defense is figure those things out. It's up to the offense to adjust and still be able to have those successes.
Well, LeVar, I am wondering, to your point, how the offensive line in Seattle reacts to this. Now, as an observer, I had no problem with what Russell did and what he said because he is right. You're right. Obviously, he holds the ball. He extends plays, so some of those sacks are on him. However, he's been sacked 394 times since he entered the league. That's more than any other quarterback since the merger about 50 years ago. So he was right. He was right that they have to protect him better. I'm wondering, does the offensive line resent that and get an attitude with Russ? And does that hurt them going forward? Or do they just take it in stride and say, look, we do have to do better. We got a Hall of Fame quarterback that we have to protect. And more importantly, the front office has to go out and get the players that can give Russ better protection, Greg.
I get that, and I hear you. And I don't think the offensive line can take the stance of resenting the way Russell Wilson displayed. Have one of the best quarterbacks in all of football and not try your best and not give every effort to make it work. Now, does that mean they are going to win? No, it does not, because I truly believe that when you look at the way this team has been configured and when you look at from the coaching and what side of the ball Pete Carroll gives the most attention to, it's that defensive side of the ball. And then his style that he wants to